Okay, first, let me welcome everyone. Thank you to our panelists for making time tonight, and thank you to all of the attendees who joined. This was really exciting because a lot of the folks who RSVP'd today are not folks who come to a lot of Palo Alto Forward events. Some of them are neighbors who I've met in passing, and some of you are neighbors who I've never met before until emailing with. So thank you. A little about me. I am Angie. I'm the one who's been emailing you, and I live in the Crescent Park neighborhood. I have 2 kids under 5, so I'm usually busy. And for those of you who don't know what Palo Alto Forward is, I just want to give a little bit of background about Palo Alto Forward. We're really a resident-led nonprofit, and we aim to increase the options, make the options better for housing and transportation in Palo Alto. I like to think that Palo Alto Forward really brings together housers, transportation, and climate activists so that we're not working in silos, and so that the decisions that we make, the policies that we pass, are more holistic. That's part of how I got involved with Palo Alto Forward. I am a housing activist, and sometimes when you make decisions just based on your own ideals, you can't create policies that are really sustainable. So it's really cool to be able to be involved in a group that does a little bit of all of it together. And today we're going to talk about a topic that is really relevant for our time. As shelter-in-place policies are shifting, as work from home is becoming more common, schools are becoming remote, transportation budgets are getting slashed, and options for pedestrian streets and small businesses are changing. So what does that mean for Palo Alto? What does that mean for Palo Altans? I'm excited to hear from all of our panelists. We're going to hear a little from Pastor Coloma at the beginning, and then some of you know him because he's on the RHC, Human Relations Commission. And then we're also going to hear from Jennifer DiBrianza from the school board, and then Adina Levin, who is involved in every number of transportation things. I put in our agenda that she is from Friends of Caltrain, but as you will hear from her, she's involved in a lot of organizations. We're also going to get to hear from Chef Manuel from, tell me if I'm saying this wrong, Santa Goose.
You're right.
Good. For those of you who don't know, he just opened up the newest restaurant in Palo Alto in the middle of COVID shelter in place. Very impressive. And then we're also going to hear from Rob Hollister from Sobrato. And so today, oftentimes we come to events like this and it's like this long panel of presentations. But today what we're going to do is we're going to hear for about 5 minutes from each expert in these different areas. And then we're going to open it up to a discussion from the audience, because I know a lot of you have really great ideas and thoughts. I manage the Palo Alto Forward Facebook group, and I get all of these incredible ideas and messages from different activists in the community. So we want to kind of allow this to be more of a discussion than a long presentation. Before I hand it off to Pastor Coloma Smith, I do want to do just kind of a quick technology check-in. So for those of you who didn't hear at the beginning, only the panelists have their video and sound on. So if you are listening in, we cannot see you. You're totally fine if you're having a bad hair day. And the chat function at the bottom, you can talk to the panelists, you can talk to one another. If you have a more specific question that you want us to get to at the beginning of the discussion area, you can put it into the Q&A box, and then I'll make sure we read that first. All right, so with that, I'm just gonna hand it off to Pastor Coloma Smith.
All right, again, I'm always honored that somebody wants to listen to anything I have to say. So thank you for the privilege of speaking. I think one of the things that has become abundantly clear over the past few months is that we need to recalibrate our thinking. I think as many leaders and many people in our community, we viewed our current situation as we would deal with the disease, we would flatten the curve, and then we would go back to some semblance of normal. I think we need to expand our thinking out to really look at it as two distinct new phases. The first is um, listening to what the medical experts are saying. We are going to live with this disease for a while, whether it's 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. So what does it look like to build community, be responsible, do all the things we need to do in this environment, and do that in a responsible way? And then also, what does it look like to be a community after that? Because a lot of norms and things will have changed during this period. I really, really do believe at this point, we need to really look at it as two different and two very separate things. The reality is that, and I'll use restaurants as an example, is we are now seeing places like California Avenue and University Avenue being changed into walking pedestrian areas, which I'm really excited about. I think it's absolutely beautiful, and people are sitting outside and eating. And that's a great thing for right now because it allows businesses to get income and serve people beyond takeout, which is not really the main model of restaurants. And then move into what does it look like after? Do we keep these pedestrian corridors open? Do they close? What does this look like? So I think in all areas we need to look at that. So we need to reframe the discussion. The other thing I really think that with COVID, the governmental response, the social justice issues, all of the other things that we are experiencing now, is that they are now reframing the discussions we had previously. I believe the solutions and the things that we presented 90 days ago around housing, around transportation, around schooling, even in my two positions in community and human relations and at the church are totally different. We need new solutions for new problems, for a new reality. And I think as we have the discussion, we need to strip away all of our old expectations, all of our own thinking, all of our old knowledge, and start looking at how do we do things new. It's very interesting. I remember for years, we had been live streaming our services and people said, that's really a nice thing to do. And, we did some Zoom Bible studies and people were like, why would you do that? People are gonna come to the church. And now we are doing Zoom Bible studies and we're doing live streaming every Sunday as our main thing. But the reality is we have realized that it is super fatiguing and it doesn't build community doing that way. So now all of the previous assumptions that we had of things that would work in this space have been thrown out. One of the things I know, and the school system is going to struggle with this more than any, is that we as human beings need contact. We need to interact. We need to see people. We need to talk to people. And as a community, we're going to have to figure out healthy ways to do that, healthy ways to make that work. And it's going to be really hard because at this point, at this time, and in this place, we're trying to balance health. We're trying to balance safety. We're trying to balance splitting our community. Do we tell seniors to stay at home? Do we tell babies to go to daycare? How do we balance this? So as we have this conversation, my first thing, and then I'm done talking, my first thing to the community is we need to lay down our old assumptions. If we bring in the assumptions and the perspectives we had 90 days ago, I think we do this discussion a disservice. We need to really talk about what are we learning right now? What are we seeing right now? What is the impact right now? And start dealing with those because that's the world we're going to be living in for the next 3 to 5 years, either through the long-term dealing with the disease and the impact the disease and the reshifting of our racial and societal justice will have. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. I think Thank you for really providing us some context to talk about this with, because I think we often jump into these policy discussions as though they're in a vacuum and we can just start to make decisions. But it's really important for us to continuously recenter ourselves on where we are and where we are going in order to figure that out together. So thank you. With that, I'm going to hand this off to Jennifer DiBrianza to talk a little bit about schools, how they might be different, how families might be impacted. Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you for having me too. I'm always, as Coloma said, when people actually want to hear something I have to say is interesting. I hope not to disappoint. Certainly there's so much to say about schools, and it's even this week and today that we're talking about reopening models and whatnot. So there's a lot going on, but generally, if you look at education in the United States, the verdict is out, and distance learning failed kids who were already under-resourced across the country. There were really bad outcomes for most kids that were under-resourced. And we know that, and it tells us, it certainly informs what we're going to do going forward. That being said, our district was in a better position than most. We are resourced enough, as much as we are never resourced enough. We were resourced enough that we were able to distribute more than 2,500 devices for distance learning. And we helped people access the internet. I don't actually know of any students that were not able to get a device and access to the internet, whether it was from a little hotspot we gave them or whatnot. So that was good. But at the same time, it's still, there's nothing like in-person learning. If remote learning were so great, we would have all moved to remote learning a long time ago. But there's something about being able to look a student in the eye, see how they're doing, see if they're confused, see if they're kind of spaced out, and be able to connect with them. And that's a lot harder to do on a Zoom. And it's even harder to do when the kids aren't logging into the Zoom for various reasons. So, in the coming year, we're going to be virtual to some degree. In some levels, it might be completely, in some levels, it'll be partially. And it means it's really incumbent upon us to pay attention to those equity issues. I've worked in schools for a very long time. I was a classroom teacher initially, and traditionally kids are pretty much offered the same thing. And, for some it's not as much as they need, and others it's more than they need. And kids, learn in different modalities and whatnot. So one of the opportunities here that I don't know if we're going to be able to take advantage of is finding ways to better serve kids how they need it. So as we think about going ahead to schools in August, no matter how much we're remote, there will be some opportunities for kids who we know in the spring gotten several no credits, didn't achieve credit, didn't log in, maybe don't have a warm meal, maybe don't have a quiet place to work. Those are kids that we've already identified, and we're looking at ways that we can bring them back socially distanced and safely in a library or a multi-purpose room or whatnot. And perhaps some kids need more one-on-one. And we've heard lots of high school kids say, sure, I know my teacher's available for office hours now, but I don't want to call them and talk one-on-one. They want different things. They need different things. They feel comfortable with different things. So we're working on that. One of the other things that really comes to mind is, as Pastor Smith mentioned, with everything that's going on in the world now, and specifically looking at the anti-racism issues that are coming up, and our recognition as a district that we have work to do in that area, that gets harder when everyone's remote, or when most are remote, right? If we know that we want our staff, our administration, our board to do this work of looking at how our system is set up to get the inequitable results that we get, we have work to do. And so when everyone is sort of crisis managing distance learning, and is everyone engaged, and what about attendance, and who's not logging in, and how do we get to them, it pushes those other things to the back burner. And we have to make sure we find a way to keep that racism work front and center, because the outcomes for our students are clear. They go across income levels and everything else. Certain ethnicities don't do as well, no matter where they are in the income level. And that's not okay. That shouldn't be a predictor of how kids do. So I guess that's it for now. There's all kinds of things to talk about with possible new building neighborhoods in Ventura and what that might mean for the school district, but I'm happy to just answer questions as we go.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was really helpful. And I think for those of you who don't know, the school board has a meeting immediately after this. So we extra appreciate that Jennifer was able to join. And I know there are a number of teachers who got on today as well. So I'm really grateful to be able to provide this additional lens that we often as housing and transportation people don't think through, because, you know, schools are integrally, you know, a part of our inequity. And as a housing activist, I'm often just talking about the housing piece of it. And we can't do that. We can't get anywhere if we don't do that. And I really appreciate that framing of like, we are in all of these different silos in crisis management, but we have to figure out how to really address all of the anti-racism work that needs to happen for our community to be whole. So
can I say one more thing I forgot?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, many things that I still want to say, but one of the other crises we're dealing with now that doesn't directly have to do with our academics, but our families, so many of them are struggling to pay their rent. I mean, there's a lot of food insecurity, but that's a smaller bill, right? There's ways that we can support families with boxes of groceries and with gift cards for the grocery store, but rent is such a big number and it's piling up, right? So there has been some postponement of what's due, but that bill's coming up. And
Right.
Those numbers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And they are our current families. These are families that are part of Palo Alto. So, you know, sometimes you hear like, oh, maybe they can't stay, they have to go, but they're our community and we want to keep them in as our community. And they are in real crisis. I mean, big dollar numbers, as I'm sure as housing advocates, you guys know. So.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that also what the data shows so far is that a lot of people did pay their rent for the last 2 months. It was very difficult. They went through their savings. They did whatever they had to do to make that rent payment. But many, many more who paid their rent in the last 2 months are considering not paying all of it or paying none of it next month, because this crisis is only getting worse and it's really exasperating the serious inequality in our communities. So, all right. So the next up, we have Adina Levin, and I'm going to let her talk a little bit about transportation. I know as someone who likes to use Caltrain and buses, I would love to hear more about, like, let's be real. People want to know, is it safe to ride the train yet? And what, if it is, then like, can we keep making investments in our transportation? So tell us.
Okay. All right, great. What great places to start. And I did put together some slides that I can share with everybody in the end, but I'm gonna talk without the slides to some of the points, really building off of what people have been talking about. So first of all, I wanna start with the question, Angie, that you started off with is public transportation safe? Because that is something that has been a concern. It has been in the news. Like a lot of things with the pandemic, this is a thing, and I really liked how Pastor Smith talked about being really open to the moment and open to new information that we are learning as things are changing. The most recent information that is starting to come in from around the world is that the risk might be overstated. So there's been some research from places including Paris and including Austria and including Japan, where they have been tracking what their clusters of COVID have been caused by. And so far in the last several months, they have found 0 clusters of COVID that were tracked to public transportation. And the one that I know of is from China, where it was a group that was going to a church event on buses, where it was people who knew each other and were singing songs on the buses. So they were engaging in a high-risk activities versus having places where there is a standard of mask wearing and also like not singing on the bus. And for those, we are not seeing evidence of risk. So that is something that we should be keeping an eye out, but that is what the data is showing to date. With regard to the Bay Area's response to COVID, so I'll go back to the introduction. So I'm the executive director of Friends of Caltrain, which is an advocacy organization focusing on successful modernization of Caltrain and stable funding for Caltrain in the context of a regionally integrated network of sustainable transportation that's accessible to all. And in the interest of those last goals, an integrated network accessible to all, I'm also a co-founder of Seamless Bay Area. And so I will talk about both of those strands in terms of the sustainable transportation and COVID. So in terms of a personal observation, I live in Menlo Park, so I'm like a mile and a half from downtown Palo Alto. And I went over to check out University Avenue, and it was really, truly wonderful. And what Palo Alto is doing with its slow streets is part of a trend that is national and international. There are 291 cities by last count around the world that are working on creating pedestrian areas and improving safety. And you know, to what Pastor Smith and Director Gibrienza was talking about in terms of what are some of the opportunities that may present themselves and new solutions in a crisis. This is both responding to the needs of the moment, but also recognizing that you know, so many of our trips, even pre-COVID, so in the United States, 46% of trips under 3 miles were taken in a car. And now in the COVID world, we are seeing bicycle sales double in the last few months, including children's bikes, including electric bikes. I have not seen as many 12-inch bicycle wheels with teeny tiny people ever before in my life. And so I think that you know, Palo Alto is one of the places that is participating in this trend. And also the confluence of things that is going on is also opening more people's eyes to the issue of street safety, also in the context of Black Lives Matter and street safety for whom, where you know, people of color are, you know, we have the terrible issues of you know, very dramatic violence and murder, but also the more day-to-day indignities of being disproportionately stopped by police, where that is not something that is ever going to happen to me, but my friends and their families, like, you know, do have these experiences of getting disproportionately stopped. And so when we are thinking about what safety means, whether it is in our streets or on public transportation, we need to be thinking about safety for whom, and including that being safety from, you know, disproportionate and unjust law enforcement. So then also moving into the observations, one of the things that we're seeing with Caltrain and much of the rest of the public transportation system is with the concerns about safety and the shelter in place, ridership was way down. Ridership on BART and Caltrain was 10% or less. Ridership on buses was, you know, maybe 20%. Ridership is starting to creep back up, but the public transportation system has been really deeply impacted by the crisis, including financially. So what we have seen, so the revenue from fares, where Caltrain and BART have depended a lot on fares, has crashed. Depend on sales tax, that revenue has crashed also. So there has been an effort to bring in some relief funding from the federal government, which is keeping the wheels turning. That will go through much of the year. but there is really a steep cliff where that money will run out. And so there are opportunities for additional federal funding to help bridge the public transportation system through the pandemic, which is important. And in terms of financial vulnerability, Caltrain is perhaps the most vulnerable among the region because its funding was unstable to begin with. And there is an opportunity that Caltrain had been working on a ballot measure where there were just surprisingly positive poll results about, very close to the 2/3 threshold of people willing to fund Caltrain, even in a poll taken during the shelter in place. So another question that might arise, well, given the fact that, white collar people are working from home, does it make sense to do that? Will people ever come back? So that same poll that showed that people wanted to do the funding also indicated that 3/4 of Caltrain riders from before the pandemic are planning to come back and use Caltrain as much or more than before. So if we do not keep the wheels running, that would be a real terrible tragedy because we're seeing car traffic come back faster to date than public transportation ridership, and we're going to be swamped by car traffic. But the other thing that we are seeing is an opportunity to rethink equity in our public transportation system, because one of the things that we're seeing in this pandemic is that the trunk bus lines, 522 on the VTA, the El Camino Real route, and similar routes in San Francisco and elsewhere in the region, those routes that are running parallel to BART and Caltrain are running full, especially with the need to have some distancing on the bus. They are passing people up. And meanwhile, there's a lot of extra room on the trains that have historically been more expensive. So there are opportunities to, during this pandemic, make those trains affordable to more people, including low-income people, which is helpful for equity, as well as helpful for public health, and opens our eyes towards opportunities for having better access before. And this is an area where Palo Alto has been a leader. Palo Alto has, before COVID, created a transportation management association that gave low-income people, low-income workers, for example, working in restaurants downtown, the same kind of free transit pass that engineers have had for years. And that, before COVID, brought 300 people to using Caltrain who are not using it before, and enable Palo Alto to defer the building of an expensive parking garage. So the COVID and thinking about transit equity and the use of the system, may open up our eyes to some new ways of providing equity, not just in Palo Alto, but around the region. And then last but not least, one of the things that we're seeing is that as transit agencies are having to cut back because of funding shortages, there has been a big push to have the system work together in ways that are more coordinated than ever before. There has been a regional task force that has been created to help recover the public transportation system in a way that can be more coordinated than it was in the past. We're already starting to see agencies, for example, as Caltrain is restoring service, making its connection at Millbrae work in a way that it has never worked before. All the agencies are starting to think about how can we bring back service, even that less service, in a way that keeps those connections running. That is something that Seamless Bay Area, the other project that I mentioned, is working very heavily on, where we have an opportunities to forge that those closer links during the pandemic and institutionalize them so our system works better to support our environmental goals and our housing goals after the pandemic. Hopefully that does some context setting, and be happy to take questions when we get to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Adina. When we get to the discussion part, I think the thing that I know is on my mind is like, is there, and again, you can answer this when we get to the discussion part, but I think let me ask the group, audience members, you have this thing where you're allowed to raise your hand. You click on the little hand thing. Raise your hand if you like sitting in traffic. Just waiting to see if anybody, I have met one person in my life who said they really enjoyed it because they listened to podcasts, but most of us really, really hate it. So when we get to the discussion part, I would love to hear more about like, if there's one action people can take to, and I know there are lots of different ways to get at this, but like, is there something that we can do to prevent the traffic from coming back? Is there one action people can take? And I'll let you think about that while we get to the next, get through the speakers to the discussion part. The next person is Chef Manuel, and I am really excited to hear from you about how you opened a restaurant in the middle of COVID in Palo Alto, and it's not your first restaurant. I also want to hear, like, you're not on University Avenue, you're not on Cal Avenue, but how are you thinking about the street closures, and are they impacting you at all as you think about, you know, the longevity of your business?
Absolutely. Thank you, Angie, for the space and the time. You know, thanks for having me, and you know, to share our story. And you know, everything started back 4 months ago for restaurants. And we have 2 other restaurants, La Viga and Elvimar, both in Redwood City. One on the main street, and the other one also outside of the downtown part. San Agus came because we were on the way of opening. I mean, we back in December we signed the lease, and so we were on the tenant improvement part, and anyway, so I mean, San Agus was already on the pipe to open, you know, early on the spring. Unfortunately, you know, COVID arrived early on March for the area, and with restaurants we start to, you know, cut back on guests that we were serving, start stopping the dine-in, and then, you know, do only the takeout. You know, we have had we've been in a roller coaster. I mean, just literally, you know, since 4 months ago. I had to close the two previous restaurants, you know, for a few days, kind of reinvent ourselves and come back with a to-go takeout plan for the smallest restaurant. I had to let about 40 employees go. I terminated them, and I only kept 4, which were the managers. And we kept one restaurant going while we were planning and see how everything was moving. The place was doing fine because naturally La Viga has been a family takeout place.
We're already getting messages from people who love La Viga. So
few weeks after, we brought some of the team that we let go back, about 4 to 5 employees, and we left them at La Viga, and we went to reopen Elvimar. So, you know, same idea, do the takeout. I mean, that was the only thing we could do back, you know, 3.5 months ago. You know, start going. And since we had the lease sign here at San Agus, we came over and finalized the final part of the building, which was painting and cleaning and, you know, setting up the dining room.
And where you guys are on, it's on Hamilton, right?
Yeah, we're on Hamilton, almost at the corner of Alma. Um, and yeah, so we said, well, let's just do the takeout part. I mean, let's start showing the community what we have and what we're offering, and let's open for for takeout. And that's what we did close to a month ago. Uh, that was the main plan. Get exposed to the community, let them know what we are capable of doing with food, and then and start building up as we did with the other restaurants as well. Luckily, we've been allowed to open the outdoor on all the locations. And Palo Alto has been so helpful by providing outdoor seating, changing the regulations and rules that they used to have previously, and allowing businesses to expand to the sidewalks or the parklets that they are also allowing, and also closing the streets as they do on University and California Avenue, which it doesn't happen here on Hamilton, but I'm experiencing that on Broadway in Redwood City, where they also close Broadway from Jefferson to El Camino Real, and that have helped a lot. I mean, San Mateo, I mean, has a different ball game because we are allowed to serve inside, with all the regulations. Even though today's order didn't affect San Mateo yet. I mean, that might come back to us.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that there won't
Yeah.
be changes.
Anyway, so we've been experiencing a really positive change for our restaurants in the way that sales are back from being 90% down to go to be at 60 now. So we're up 20% from when COVID started. We were able to bring 50% of the staff back, and we keep counting. Every day it's different. Redwood City, we started doing 10 covers, 20. Right now we're doing over 60. Weekends we're doing about 100 covers only outside, which is amazing. So I mean, the closures and the additions of the parklets and sidewalk seating, it's helping restaurants positively, and I'm so happy that Palo Alto it's helping out restaurants and allowing them to open the patios, because that's bringing not only business back but employment back, and and it's keeping people from doing bad things as well.
I hope that there's somebody on from the city of Palo Alto, because I don't think they get a ton of you guys did a great job.
No, they did definitely, and we're working with them. Or we've been applying for to extend the outdoor for a temporarily, what they call temporarily parklet, which can allow us to serve another 3-4 tables, and keep going with our goal, which is serve food, serve the community, serve our employees, serve serve to everyone, definitely.
Thank you. And before we go on to Rob, can you tell folks just a little bit about what you guys serve at your restaurant? So.
Yes, of course. I'm from the city of Mexico. I was born and raised there until until high school. I'm 42 now, so you can do the math. I've been here probably more. I've been here more than half of my life in the area, the Bay Area. Been working in places from San Jose to San Francisco, so working in so many different cuisines. Anyway, so here in San Agustín, I'm bringing what my childhood food was, which is a street food of Mexico City. So I'm bringing tortas, quesadillas, tacos, and also I'm putting a little bit of my experience that I have learned in the last 24 years on it. We're also serving craft cocktails based on mezcal and agave and tequila. So you can order those to go or enjoy them on the sidewalk.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have not tried it yet, but I'm very excited because I also looked at the menu. I saw Adina also looked at the menu, and I think you have a few new people who want to try you. So we're excited.
Thank you.
All right. So the next person we have is Rob from Sobrato. Thank you again for making time. I think there are a myriad of issues that you could address or talk about. But I think a lot of us who came to this around the idea of housing, you know, we keep hearing this idea that like cities are not going to exist anymore, that all the tech workers are going to move away, and somehow our housing crisis is going to be over. And I think you and I and many of us know that that's just not true. We have heard for decades that if remote work were ever possible, then people would leave New York City, and it would, you know, nobody would live in any of the cities ever again because they could live somewhere and work remotely. And that's just never happened before. And while we are in a very unique time, I don't think Silicon Valley or Palo Alto or the Bay Area is going to become any less relevant. And I think the other thing that we continue to hear a lot about is whether we need office space anymore. You know, if workers are remote, are all of these workers going to suddenly become 100% remote all the time? So do we need offices anymore? So with that, Rob, I will hand it to you to answer a lot of these very difficult questions.
So given that I've had 2 kids, a dog, and a wife walk through here so far on this call, I'll say I need an office. I don't know about everybody else, but just quickly for those of you who may not know a lot about Sobrato. So we're a family-owned real estate company and charitable foundation, and our rough business model is about half the profits of the company either end up in our charitable foundation or are given away in direct grants. So we give away about $50 or $60 million a year. And, you know, we try and tie that as local giving where we do business. The mission of the company is to make Silicon Valley, which is broader now because we're in places like Seattle and San Francisco, but it started as make Silicon Valley a place of opportunity for all its residents, which really boils down to us trying to attack the problems of the people who are being left behind in the prosperity that we've had here. So we focus on things like housing and a lot of educational and job training type initiatives. We operate up and down the West Coast. So some of what I'm going to comment on is based on experience, you know, broader than Palo Alto. I'll try and keep it to what I think is relevant to Palo Alto. We do have a few properties there. Actually, I want to give a plug for our newest nonprofit center, which we just announced at 3460 West Bayshore. If you're familiar with that, we have 4 of these where we give rent-free space to local nonprofits. One of the biggest problems with, I guess, the success companies like we have is we price out the organizations that serve the community, and these nonprofit centers are our way to try and address that. So we're just taking applicants to put people in there right now. We do office and residential and a bit of retail. So to try and touch on the things that Angie asked about, you know, on the residential side, and bear in mind that most of our properties are what you call Class A, so it's generally a middle and higher income clientele. But we do have affordable units in many of our properties as well. But, you know, just to sort of debunk the idea that all of a sudden everyone's leaving, there are a lot of great anecdotal stories in the New York Times, but you know, first of all, we've collected over 97% of our residential rents in every month since the pandemic started. We're not forcing people to pay. Our perspective is pay if you can. If you can't, we'll figure it out on the other side of this thing. but 97%, more than 97% are paying. And part of that's our clientele, but a lot of that is the unemployment benefits, which have been generous. I'm quite worried about the second half of the year if our Congress probably doesn't get their act together to extend those. So I actually think we're going to see even more suffering in the second half of the year. But so far, the ability to pay rent's been better than we thought. We also are only about 1% lower on our occupancy rates, and this is on about 7,000 apartments, than we were at the same time last year. And since the shelter-in-place orders have started to loosen, we thought maybe we weren't seeing people move out because they couldn't, right? Where are you going to go? But since things have loosened up, not only here, but around the country, actually, our occupancy's ticked up, not down. We've been seeing more new leases and move-ins. So for all the anecdotal evidence, we're not seeing any reduction in demand. We are seeing rents go down a little bit, which is probably a good thing for everybody. But I'm actually more concerned on the other side, on the housing. Rents are going down. Construction costs are probably flat. They may go up because productivity is lower under a COVID situation. So I think you're going to see fewer units built, which is, not great on the market rate side. But when you consider how much inclusionary housing and the fees from office buildings contribute to affordable housing, I volunteer with Habitat for Humanity, and I felt like our area was finally starting to get some traction on affordable housing, and I'm really, really concerned that the supply of affordable housing is going to be, almost irreparably harmed by this event with less funding, fewer projects going forward. So, as of right now, I think the Bay Area may become a little more affordable for some people, but we don't see any lack of demand there right now. On the office space, I'm going to caveat this by saying it's just really too early to say much. Everybody's still working from home. We've had one or two office tenants start to bring their people back, and then with the surge of cases in California, they just went right back to work from home. I think that most of the employers are being very, very cautious. I will say anecdotally, and surveys we've done, there are very few people who want to work from home full time. Maybe it's 20% of the population, maybe it's 10. There are a lot of people who want to work from home 1 or 2 days a week. And so that's one of the interesting things for us to try and sort out, and for these companies to sort out. So maybe you have 20% fewer, maybe even 40% fewer people in the office. But, as many of you probably know, almost none of the tech companies' current space standards allow for social distancing. So if your space per employee goes up by 20 or 30%, you're kind of break even on office space. Then the thing that gets even harder is, if you have people working from home 1 or 2 days a week, are they going to share workspaces with others, which was common before this? Kind of unpopular idea right now that you might share a desk with somebody. So I honestly don't know what's going to happen with office, but my guess is that at the end of the day, we're going to be about where we are. Maybe there's 5% more demand, maybe there's 5% less demand. I don't see office going away, and I don't see people moving in mass out of this area. Why don't I stop there? I've probably been talking long enough, but happy to answer questions as we go along.
Great. Thank you for kind of covering all of those things. I think it tracks a lot with what I've been thinking. I think I also saw in the chat it really tracks with a lot of what other people are thinking. And I think your family and dog and everyone going through the room, I think that really speaks to many of our experiences trying to work from home. We are all doing the best we can, but that doesn't mean that we love doing it. And I think what many of the surveys I've seen show is that exactly what you're saying, people want to work from home Monday and Friday, but they don't want to work from home indefinitely 100% of the time. And I think back to what either Pastor Smith or Jennifer said, we need human interaction. So thank you. Okay, so we have a bunch of questions in the Q&A. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through the Q&A sections. And then if we still have time, then I will see if we can let people raise their hands and unmute them. But we'll start with the Q&A. And so for those of you who are audience members or attendees, you will see again in the bottom of your screen, or sometimes I think it's in the top of your screen, there's a bar that says mute, stop video, share screen. It says a bunch of things. It has, and it says Q&A and it says chat. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A box and I will try and summarize and get to them. If there are overlapping questions, then I'll combine them. But let's just start. So one of the first questions we got, what are some of the implications right now for folks who are renters? Rob, I think you mentioned a little bit that you don't think rents are going to go down much, but maybe you can speak a little bit to what you think might happen.
Yeah, what we've seen, and it depends a lot on the market, is just doing a week-to-week comparison right before the pandemic, right before shelter in place, and then first week of June. The rents are down anywhere from let's say 5 to 15% for apartments, but I actually think that's going to be pretty short-lived. Most of that is landlords giving you, say, a month of free or 2 months of free rent to move in, just to try and keep their properties occupied. But I don't think that it's really going to be a long-term trend downward. I think they'll start to tick up again. And so, as I read, I think the question you were referring to, I think the impact on inequality is going to be fairly severe, meaning, it's going to be the people in affordable housing or lower cost apartments, oftentimes essential workers service workers who get laid off, who see their unemployment benefits dry up, and they're going to be the ones that struggle. And then most of the tech workers, their companies, frankly, have enough money to keep working from home and paying them the same thing that they're getting paid, fairly indefinitely. I think that the government's very attuned to this on the local, the state, and the national level, which I think is good. But I think you're going to see a variety of approaches from landlords. Just with us, and some people like this and some people don't. We're prioritizing our residents, meaning we're going to first forgive as much rent as we can for residents who need that support, and then we're going to get to small retailers, and office tenants are the last that are going to get any relief from us. That's how we're prioritizing it. I think you're going to see other landlords take a different approach. I think I guess, like I said in my intro, I think this is going to be the most painful at the affordable housing level, and the people who rely on that. We don't have enough of it. We don't have enough funding for it. And if there are fewer projects going forward and paying fees and building legally affordable units into their market rate projects, that's going to be a real difficult area.
Yeah. Other folks on the panel who have things to add? So for all the panelists, any of you can jump in first for this next question. What are the critical services and products you provide, and how do they relate to social justice? So maybe speak to one of the things that you feel like your work, how it relates to sort of the social change world, social justice world.
Well, ladies first.
No. You go.
I think multiple dimensions of what we do in my field, particularly with our level of activism before COVID-19, particularly around issues of bias and challenges for African American and marginalized communities. We were highly involved in social justice. So, you know, institutions of faith have always been significant drivers of organization, of lifting up issues of moral and ethical debate, of places to drive social justice, and university has been that place in Palo Alto for the past 4 or 5 years. Also, serving on the HRC, I've spent a lot of time listening to a lot of different organizations, working with a lot of different organizations, particularly around issues of social justice. The challenge that I see is that we're going to have to recalibrate on some of the issues that we will need to deal with. I think Rob mentioned something, but I think we really need to talk about it, is predominantly the folks that will be significantly impacted are those in the service sector, those that are hourly. Given that, for example, we know Stanford is going to do layoffs. We know a lot of people are contractors at tech campuses. We know people that were doing Uber and Lyft and service are predominantly Black and brown, and they are going to be impacted dramatically by this. You know, we now, and my percentages may be off, I believe it's like they recommend 25% of your living wage should be towards housing, but we live in an area where it's more to 50, 60% of most people's living wage. So you're going to see a lot of people that were lower middle class, maybe even middle class, start slipping into really significant fiscal and financial issues. And as we talk about homelessness, we're going to see those that were gainfully employed, want to be gainfully employed, want to be working, can't work, and it's going to be a significant challenge. We also, the other thing I think we don't talk about is the fact that because of the expense of housing, most people do not live in optimal housing for family sizing. So, you know, what in the Midwest would be a 2 or 3 or 4 bedroom house is here a 1 or 2 bedroom house with space, you know, with less space. So one of the challenges of people working from home, people doing school from home, is that they it's very hard. I have a 10-month-old, which you're probably hearing in the background right now. And you know, Rob had his wife and the dog come through. You know, we are living in spaces of 1,700, 1,200, 1,700, 2,000 square feet, when the average American is living in spaces of 3,000 to 4,000 square feet in housing with land and stuff. So there's a lot of challenge around the work from home, do school from home. I know I've talked to a lot of people. I'm sorry, I'm a little tangent, but I'm gonna run with it.
Oh no, we're happy with tangent.
Okay, that they want to go back to work. They want to go back to school. You know, not only for the mental health, but just for the space separation, just for the fact they can't work. You know, one of the challenges, and I'm not going to pick on Comcast. I don't know who owns it or if it's a stock company, but you start putting 3 or 4 computers in a house on your average Comcast network, it starts locking up. You know, you start doing 2 or 3 Zooms in a house, you start getting noise pollution. People start hearing other people and other conversations. So our homes aren't built to do triple duty. They're not a schoolhouse, they're not an office, and they're not a house. So I think these are the challenges and the issues and the mental health challenges we're going to have. It's going to be a big deal. I think our houses aren't designed for people to sit in them for 24 hours a day for 4, 5, 6 days in a row. So I'm sorry if I went on a tangent, but I just had to sort of get that off my chest.
You bring up the really important point, which is that people who are people in the Bay Area are particularly, if you are housing or economically insecure, you are in a deeper level of poverty. The difference between the poor and the rich here is very big. And this, this pandemic is not going to bring us closer together economically. In fact, it's going to make it much worse. And while Silicon Valley will continue to be relevant, the disparity between the rich and the poor is going to get worse. And so I think that leads me to one of the other questions that I thought was really good, which is, you know, how can each of you with the work that you're doing, and how can the city of Palo Alto, how can we really come together and work harder to serve underserved families in education and housing, in all of these different issues? Jennifer, you had your hand
So,
first.
multi-pronged answer. I'll try not to go off on too many tangents. But I think that the, you know, school districts aren't built to be social services. And yet there's a lot of ways that we really already play that role and need to play that role better. As soon as the shutdown happened, one of the things that happened early on was that the district partnered with Life Moves, and working with families to get, Palo Alto Community Fund raised money that was turned into gift cards to grocery stores through Life Moves. And then that was a connection. You know, what one of the limits of a public school is we can't disclose people who are in need, right? I mean, I'm sure that's true of a lot of different organizations, but we are precluded from saying, oh, here's a list of people that have needs, go help them, right? So what we do is we talk to those families and say, if you want to, reach out to Life Moves, you know, this. And so outside organizations, I think, are much better positioned to give some of the help that is needed. But that's a basic level, right? That's like needs, that's housing, that's food, that's, do you have Wi-Fi, do you have a computer? After that, I think one of the really big things that we all could have predicted, but we have found this spring, is that social connection, right? I mean, I think we're all social creatures, but teenagers especially, it is so different for them to be isolated here at their homes, even if they're talking on a Zoom. It is so isolating to be here and not just be chilling with your friends on campus. So knowing the role we play in that and how important it is somehow. So as the district looks at potentially looking at a completely remote opening in the fall for secondary kids, what opportunity is there, as long as we're not in shelter in place, to open up our campus in safe ways? Can kids sign up to do a ceramics class with a friend? Kids who play sports come and practice in socially distanced ways? Is there a way that our campus can be open so that families who are comfortable can send their kids there? Because before you even talk about the academics, if kids aren't in a mindset where they're ready to learn and they're engaged and they're not completely checked out or battling depression, that's really hard, right? And so those two work really well together. I mean, are very intertwined, right? If you're really depressed, it's going to be harder to engage. And if you have something worth engaging in, it's going to help you engage more. So those are really connected. And then you get to that third step, which is really the academics and how we can supply those academics. And we have lots of partners in town. Dreamcatchers is one of them. Foundation for a College Education is another, that really help us with either under-resourced kids or with kids that live in a particular area. Buena Vista has a homework club that just a couple of wonderful community members started to make sure that homework help was provided there at Buena Vista. So I think it's even more important now than ever that we partner with the Human Relations Commission, with all different organizations to do this work. And the final one I'll say that we have a responsibility to provide for kids is providing them in anti-racist education, an education that does not further push the narratives that have been pushed for a long time and make our students of color feel less than in any way. And again, that's going to be harder to get to that point remotely, but we're working on it. It's a priority for sure.
Thank you. Other folks want to answer that question? Adina?
So I will chime in on this because there is an initiative that Friends of Caltrain has been working on for 5 or 6 years now that may be about to bear fruit in policy and funding. So the Palo Alto Transportation Management Association pilot program to give Caltrain and other transit passes to low-income workers. We had actually started working on that with some research that was grant funded 6 years ago now, because historically in our region, the way that we think about transportation, and particularly public transportation, is that we observe that low-income people who use public transportation tend to use buses, and higher-income people tend to use trains. And the conventional wisdom has been that that is because it's the way that people like it. So low-income people like buses, high-income people like trains. These are different products, so different market segments, and there's really no need to change that because that's what people want. And the hypothesis that I had in looking at this was that there are some structural reasons that was why it was so, and the research that we did, starting with a smaller sample research and some student volunteers to get several hundred responses, was that higher income commuters were more likely to have transportation benefits and discount transit passes from their employer, and low income people did not get those benefits. And there was a correlation between what services that people use. And so when Palo Alto was looking into creating a transportation management association to alleviate its traffic and parking problems, they did quantitative research, statistically significant, and showed that much more rigorously that was the case. And then using that as a base, we did some advocacy focused on Caltrain to encourage them to look at the inequities in their policies. And Caltrain found that their fare structure gave the deepest discounts to their highest income customers, and their lowest income customers pay the highest per trip. And not only that, there's an issue of connectivity where low income people are the most likely to want to take public transportation to the train. And historically, we have not coordinated our schedules or the transfer pricing. And that has led up to Caltrain having a set of policies on equity and connectivity that will be coming before their board for review in July and approval in August, and potentially getting baked into their ballot measure for funding. And interestingly, those connectivity and affordability issues also scored really high priority in the poll that Caltrain did for their ballot measure. So this is something we've been working on for many years, and has gone from a crazy idea to something that's about to be some board decisions. So if people do think that we have an opportunity to have a public transportation system that is more equitable and more connected and better at alleviating traffic congestion in the future, we'll have some follow-up information, because support for that is going to be helpful. And this also relates to some of the issues and questions about car traffic and different types of work and changes in work. So I agree with the point that we are not going to see the end of office work. I'm going to make a different point relating to social justice. There was this fascinating stat from the early weeks of COVID suggesting that in the first month or two of shelter in place, male academics were publishing more papers, and female academics were publishing fewer papers. And there was a differential impact on who is being affected by shelter in place and their ability to work. And the other thing I've heard anecdotally from younger people in office work is, and from other people, is that working from home is mining the social relationships that have been established over a long time of working in person. So even if there's going to be some more increase in work from home, if you do it in the long term, you do not have a chance to build up those relationships. But also, even where there may be more opportunities for white collar jobs to stagger the peak of trips, which can help relieve car traffic, we're still going to need to have a functioning public transportation system to avoid a crush of car traffic. And we may also have opportunities to fix some of the equity and connectivity issues that are problems around the region to enable more people at a variety of income levels to use fast and frequent public transportation. Because the other thing that we know is that the vast majority of working poor people in the Bay Area drive cars and have been commuting by car. So another opportunity to improve environmental sustainability and reduce stress for people is to fix our public transportation policies. So those are some things that have been working with Caltrain and also Seamless Bay Area, where there's some opportunities to make some advances.
Thank you, Adina. And I think, so the first time I met Adina was at a holiday party, and Adina talked to me a little bit about just this in Palo Alto. I remember it because I thought what a crazy thing is. She just walked around and talked to all the small businesses and asked them how many of their employees would like Caltrain passes. And, you know, I think there's a lot that is very hard about the time that we are in right now. I think COVID, economic problems, having to really face the Black Lives Matter movement is here because we have made bad decisions, and it is time for us to change them. Change is hard. But you know, I think what I love about all of this is that as we have been organizing over the years, and as young people are organizing now, they are changing what is possible in all of these areas, in housing and transportation and education. And I'm really excited to see that. I'm really excited to see what's going to be possible. What are the things that we're going to be demanding in a year? Because I think we may not have imagined them yet. So let's get back to some of these questions. We've got about 15 minutes yet, so I'm gonna hop around a little bit. Rob, what are 2 key policies or actions that you think Palo Alto City or Santa Clara County government could create or adopt to support successful construction of office and residential uses over the next 5+ years? Is there 1 or 2?
Yeah, I want to be careful how I say this because I may just come across as a developer, and I guess I am a developer. But the biggest issue remains CEQA and the time it takes to get projects approved. And it's not that I am against environmental review of projects. I am against it taking, 5 years to get a project that was contemplated under the zoning and the general plan approved. There's so much process in this state, and it takes so long. And one of the things we're seeing right now, we have a residential project fully entitled in El Camino in Palo Alto, that had it been entitled, 18 months ago, it'd probably be under construction right now. Now it doesn't make financial sense to build. We're hoping it'll turn into a condo project and get built, but the time that these things take have consequences, and CEQA has become a tool not for protecting the environment that we live in. It's become a tool for labor unions to extract concessions. It's been obviously a tool for people who just disagree with what the general plan says or what the zoning says to slow down projects. And nothing about this crisis has changed that. So that's by far the biggest issue. I'd rather see as a developer, I'd rather see a down zoning of the whole area, but true zoning by right, than, what we have now where it actually benefits Sobrato because we're private and we can spend a lot of time and money entitling things, but it's not good for the area. We need to decide what we want, have good planning, and then we need to let that stuff go forward.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I say one thing?
Absolutely.
In my prior career, I worked with a lot of developers in New York City, and I've worked in construction before. And the one thing I have to agree with Rob, we have people that are purposely abusing the rules that will not let us build market rate or affordable housing at any point in time. And they bully and badger the people at City Hall to push that they are the only opinion in the city. And when time comes, we cannot get the projects we need done. I don't know how they make money anymore. And, you know, one of the things I said a couple of years ago, and I'll say it to Palo Alto, you can't have the top technology companies, the top universities in the world, and then turn around and want to have the layout of a Midwest town.
You know, just one very Palo Alto specific thing, sorry to take up airtime, but I'll just give you an example. You know, a number of years ago, Palo Alto got rid of what they called their planned community process. And planned community, planned development, different cities have different names for it, essentially means let the landowner come in and ask for whatever they want and give them spot zoning in return for something. That's basically what it is. Palo Alto got rid of it, which I thought was great. They're talking about bringing it back, or maybe they did bring it back. I can't remember whether they voted on it or not. It is an excuse for doing for not doing your planning. And I think it's crazy that a guy like me gets to go buy a piece of property zoned for single family housing. And as long as I offer enough to the city, I get to build a 6-story apartment building. That's just insanity. And it's one thing Palo Alto should not go back to that. Don't go back to spot zoning. Don't go back to planned community. Just decide what you want, zone for it, and let people build it.
I want to, you know, I never thought I'd be on a call with a developer and agreeing, but I want to say one other thing. One of the things that Palo Alto does, and it's part of our privilege here, is we zone, fee, and committee everything. And when you zone, fee, and committee everything and make the hurdles harder, you automatically, by process, make it an unequitable situation for people to be here. I pastor a church. I had to replace a roof. I needed architectural drawings. I needed thousands of dollars of pre-work. This is for something that's been zoned already, and that's just to get a roof replaced in the city. It took us like 12 weeks to put a sign up. It cost us thousands of dollars to replace a sign. Like, if you want to talk about equity in a city, and Chef Manuel, I'm pretty sure you could talk about going to the development office and the process that it costs. This is where equity happens in this town. We can do performative things like paint Black Lives Matter on the street. But then when Black and brown business owners or we try to create affordable housing and we price people out and then turn around and be like, I don't know why they won't come, it's insane. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. Chef Manuel, did you have a?
No, I do agree. I mean, some of the processes make no sense. I mean, we ended up paying more than we should. I mean, you know, right now, you know, in order just to get a liquor license, or, you know, it's over $10,000 on the top of what the license cost. And I mean, there are some rates that are so ridiculous, and some things that you have to redo over and over. But I mean, we just need to follow the rules and keep up with them. Yeah, I do agree. I mean, there are some things that could be changed, and you know, on the planning side. But anyway, I'm not an specialist, so I don't want to go too much into it.
Thank you. So we have 5 or 6 minutes left. I want to open it up to see if any of the panelists had you know, more thoughts or things that they didn't get to say yet. No? It's fine. Yes, Adina?
Yeah, I'll just say one thing about that, the crisis that we're seeing and opportunities in transportation there are going to be a number of really important things that are opportunities for participation and weighing in at the local level and the regional level and the state level and the federal level. For those who are interested in, in taking action, happy to provide what that information is, because it's really going to take a lot of support to be able to, continue the things that are good and be able to keep the system from crashing in the meantime. So that was what I want to share.
I have one last thing to share. There's a lot of talk around systemic issues and systemic racism and systemic inequalities. And one of the things I feel that terminology is correct, and we have some profound systemic issues around policing, around development, but systems start from the input point. And the input point are the people that live in the community, the people that vote, and the people that by their daily choices make impacts in the community. We can change the police force all we want, but if 70% of their phone calls come from people that are originating in the community to say there are people out here that look suspicious is not a crime. We can say we want better zoning and we want this, but then we defend and our actions become very NIMBY-ish. We will have challenges around it. So as much outrage and as much vigor and energy you have, what are the inputs that you're putting into the system that generate the systemic issues we're seeing? Because I think this is a significant part of the conversation that I hear in the HRC, that I hear as a pastor, that I hear in all of these discussions, is we assailed the tower of the city and the police and the developers, and then we have in the transportation system and everything else and the school system, but then we have people that are putting in inputs that are building the system that they're complaining about.
I don't really want to go after that.
But amen to that.
Exactly. Amen to that. Pastor Coloma Smith said it way better than I could. I think, I want to thank all of our panelists. I think this was really helpful for me. I did not have the idea of putting this panel together, but when someone else had the idea, I was like, I want to go to that. So, I just really appreciate all of you taking the time to have this discussion. I wish we had hours and hours to have this salon, but we don't, because I know everybody, work from home has really blurred those lines between work-life balance, and I want to make sure that I honor the time we said we would end by, so that you can get back to all of the things in your life.
I'm going to go log into my other meeting. I hope to see some of you there. Thank you so much. It was nice to be a part of the conversation.
And I'll send a recording out along with some links to everyone who RSVP'd. Thank you again, and everyone have a great night.
Same to you.
Thank you.